Option number one is take a day, right? So this is a very common thing that everybody does, and there is different options. So taking a full day to prep your full week is usually what everyone thinks when they think of basically prep for success. This is definitely an option if you like to eat the same thing every day, or again, in that day, if you're cooking multiple things, right? It can just, that's why it takes usually a day, because a lot of people will just, okay, let's do 4 of this meal and then 4 of that meal and then 4 of this meal and 4 of that meal, kind of for the week, right? But again, that's again, it takes a lot of time, but you can definitely do that. Like, if you enjoy cooking and you don't mind taking a few hours or even a whole day of cooking and just kind of have fun with it, totally, that is an option. So basically this one here, just to help minimize and really reduce the time that you're going to basically spend cooking and prepping and everything like that, is a factory technique, right? So in a factory, the reason why factories are very, very efficient, this is, I guess, predated electronics and robots, but even robots, they do their own individual tasks, right? So it's not just like one robot doing a whole things or one human going around running and building a car. It's a lot of different workers, whether that be the robot or the human, just doing a simple job, right? So just like picking up a part, checking it, plugging another part in, put it back on the belt, goes to somebody else. The reason why that works so well is because it's repetition, right? So if you're doing the same thing over and over again, your brain adapts to it very quickly. Now, let's now put that basically on cooking and prepping, right? So if you're cutting, cooking, packing, and you're trying to do that all in the exact same time, it's going to be very difficult, right? Like, let me just kind of prep this one meal, let's cook it, let's pack it, let's go back to cutting, let's go back to cooking, let's go back, right? So if you're doing that circle, it doesn't really work well, right? Because your brain always has to change what it's doing, and it works really well without multitasking, right? Like, our brain actually can't multitask, so it focuses on one thing at once. So instead of jumping around and focusing on different things, focus on the cutting, right? Cut all of your fruits, your vegetables, your meats, your whatever you need. Prep that first, so prep the raw ingredients, we would call it. And then you're going to move on to cooking, right? So you want to cook, you want to cook everything kind of together, but focus on just the cooking aspect, right? Over the stove or whatever you're using. And then you want to go down to like the cool down and like packing kind of thing. So we're going to go over that now. So again, it kind of breaks it down into 4 different parts, right? So you want to focus on shopping. You want to focus on shopping and get all the shopping done first, right? You don't want to like start cutting and realize, oh, I don't have any mushrooms, or I don't know, this recipe calls for butter. I don't have any butter, right? So then you're going to stop cutting, go to the grocery store, buy something, come back, keep cutting, and then realize you forget something else, right? So that's the factory technique, is just kind of breaking it out in blocks. So again, make a list of everything that you want. So what I do in these cases, not specifically to the way that we're prepping here, but what I usually do is I have Alexa, so you can actually tell Alexa to put things on your shopping list. Works super, it's amazing, because you basically take your phone out, you look, and it has that shopping list for you. Sometimes she gets things wrong. Doesn't matter. She's upgrading as we go. But it's a really, really good feature, right? Instead of jotting stuff down. But even if you have a grocery list, kind of jot things down at the time. Yeah, if that works for you, that works for you. But again, make sure that you're buying all the food that you need for the day beforehand, instead of going out and in, out and in, right? That creates a really long day if you're not prepared. And then looking at recipes before you go shopping is obviously the best, right? Because then you actually know, like, a lot of recipes out there, and I can share some links too under here, but a lot of recipes actually have a shopping list to them these days. So you'll just kind of go to them to the bottom, this is the shopping list, this is what you need, right? So then you can kind of go and be prepared, especially if you have a couple recipes you want to do that one day. Focusing on snacks and stuff too, right? It's not just about the meals. So cutting, right? So cutting, or really prepping raw ingredients. So cutting, again, I would say like pretty close to 95% of cooking and prepping, right, is actually just cutting vegetables. They just takes a lot of time to do, especially if your knife skills are not the best or the sharpest. So focus on cutting all the vegetables, meats, fruits, etc. That you want to cook beforehand, right? That factory technique. And then we're going to move on to cooking. So make sure that you have all the spices, the oils, the sauces that you want to use, right? You can even make the sauces from yourself, but make sure, make the sauces yourself, but make sure that you have the ingredients to make those as well, right? You don't want to go run back, get the tomatoes or something like that. If you're making a tomato sauce, you want to, again, make it easier on yourself. Use your time very wisely as well. So using like pressure cookers or slow cookers or air fryers, stoves with timers or something, so that you set it, right? And then on a lot of stoves and a lot of ovens, they actually have a cook time, right? They have a timer, but they have a cook time where you set it, the recipe says 20 minutes, cook this. You set it for 20 minutes and then it shuts down the oven itself, right? So you don't have to go shut it down, check stuff like that. So you can kind of move on to something else and go utilize your time better, right? So that really, again, cuts down on the cooking time. So cooking time really is just the technology we're using these days, right? It's not really much of us stirring or much of cooking per se, right? Because we have a lot of technology these days where we can utilize. And then final would be splitting your food. So before putting your food away, right, you got to make sure it cools down before you put it right in the fridge. That is food health thing for you guys, free tip. So you want to cool it down before you actually put it into the fridge, right? Because that's going to warm up your fridge and it's just not really good at all, right? So if you have like water droplets on the top of your container, that's just moisture gets into the food. It doesn't last as long. So a good technique to cool it down, it's actually splitting it into your even portions right away. And then you basically just keep it on the counter. Usually glassware works the best, but keep it on the counter and then just let it cool down to room temperature, maybe like, I don't know, an hour, maybe half hour or something. And then from there, you can seal it and put it in the fridge, right? You got to make sure that it cools down first. Just make sure it doesn't sit there for over 2 hours. But yeah, half hour to an hour would be fine. So just make sure, and then that's a really good way to split it, right? Because if you keep it on the stove, or if you keep it in a big, like all the food together, it's going to take a lot longer to cool down. So it's going to take a lot longer for you to wait for it to cool down, to then go back and then divide it and then put it in the fridge, right? So you want to kind of divide it first. It helps with cooling it down, and then from there. Especially too, and another good prep thing too, instead of like the cutting, or while you're doing the cutting or after the shopping, is if you have like a lot of meats, like chicken, for example, right? You can kind of individually pack those before you put it in the freezer. If you have things like beans or something, it's good to smush those pretty thin. So if you have like a bag, with a Ziploc bag instead of a container, you do it thin, because then it defrosts a lot easier instead of having a big block of like beans or whatever it is, really sauce or anything. Try to keep it more flat, like in a bag, because then the thinner it is, the easier it is to actually defrost. So then we'll get to another point where it's easier to defrost and get there. So option number 2, this one here is one of my personal favorites. It actually works very well. We all have a savings account, right? So this one here, I'm going to call it savings account. So the reason I call it a savings account is because when you have time to cook, right? For instance, like Saturday, Sunday, or even one time through the week, maybe you have a day off, right? Maybe you have some shift work or something. When you have time to cook or prep during the week, or again, cook during the week or prep vegetables or whatever that you're doing, cut a little bit more or cook a little bit more of whatever you're doing, right? So if you're doing like rice and lentils, don't just cook like enough rice for you to eat at that meal. Just cook more rice, right? Just some more servings, and then you can keep it in your fridge, or just have it ready for the times that you don't have any time, right? Just like a savings account. Like when you have money, you save the money for when you don't have the money, you have the backup money, right? This is almost like a backup food account, if you will. So it's a food savings account. This is, it's great, right? Because then you don't have to kind of waste a whole day if you don't like cooking, right? If you enjoy doing the whole prep in one day, go ahead. I mean, it's all to you. It works for you. But if you don't, if you want to kind of have your weekends to yourself and not have to feel like you have to do work, this works really well. Because if you're, again, the factory method too kind of goes into that technique, because you're doing something right now. Why not do something and then just do a little bit more? You're doing it anyway, so it's much easier to just continue with that, right? Instead of later on just taking something out to prep. If you're doing it already now anyway, it's good to just continue and just make a little bit more. Really good for, again, just cutting vegetables and stuff, getting those ready. So yeah, any extra rice, pasta, chicken, whatever it is, it's really good to to do for the savings account. One really good thing to mention on here. So for storing already cut and cooked foods, you want it to last a little bit longer, right? So especially for like cooked foods and stuff, you want it to last a bit longer. So a really good idea. Like we have a lot of technology these days in 2022. So we have like technologies like vacuum seals work really well. You can get them in a whole different types, right? Like if you don't like a lot of plastic, they actually come with like containers now. So instead of using the plastic you're seeing in this picture, you can actually have a container, and then it has like almost a pump. So it's an electronic pump that takes away the oxygen, the air that's inside. So it vacuum seals it in a container instead of like plastic. So you're not kind of wasting plastic and stuff. Yeah, so that's a really good idea as well, just to make things last longer. And even when you go and like get food from the grocery store, like 50% off stuff or something, or anything like that, basically what you want to do is vacuum seal it right away, right? So then it will even last longer. I mean, it can last up to like five times longer, 7 times longer than it normally would, just because it doesn't have that, it doesn't oxidize. Yes, so option number 3. So this one here is really good. This is what I mentioned to a lot of my clients is almost everyone has a magical device called a slow cooker. If you don't know where it is, it's usually in your basement next to the box of old pictures. So it's time to dust it off and save some time. So yeah, like almost everyone I talk to, they do have a slow cooker, and these days too, you have a slow cooker, a pressure cooker, and a air fryer all in one machine, right? So you kind of utilize everything that you do instead of just using it for an air frying, or if you're just going to use it for, say, like a pressure cooker or something. The slow cooker is an amazing tool, right? Because then with this technique, it works very good because especially alongside the savings account we just talked about, is because, again, you're seeing kind of all those raw foods in that pressure cooker in that picture. So this one here just looks like basically a green pea soup. Again, you got some bay leaf, you have some parsley, a little bit of salt. It looks like butternut squash, celery, onions. We have some basil and rosemary in there as well. And some garlic. So there you go. There's a recipe for you guys. And then, of course, the green is just split peas, green peas. So this works really well because you could just throw the things that you've already prepped into a soup, right? The soup works really well. Or add some chicken in there or whatever you kind of want to do. There's a lot of recipes. There's millions of recipes online for slow cooker recipes. So this works really well because it's a time saver. All you have to do is basically throw the food in a slow cooker, set the time that you'll be home or around, right? It's like, I'm going to be home in 9 hours or whatever it is, like whenever supper time is. Obviously, it's going to save you some time, but it's really going to save you, it's going to smell amazing. It's basically like you have a personal cook in your house. Because when you walk in, all you're going to smell, right, is that soup, is that like split pea soup that's here in this picture. So again, all that garlic and all of that spices and all the food and stuff is just going to smell amazing in your house, especially if like roast turkey or anything, especially like in slow cooker and stuff. It will smell amazing. You could also do chili as well. Chili is super easy to do in a slow cooker, right? It's just throwing ingredients. You just let it cook for a while. Just don't forget like some spices and stuff. Yeah. So number 4, last but not least, is buying prep food. So again, if you don't have any time for like a day to cut up your food, if you, again, don't have time to do the savings account, so you don't have time at all, this is a really good option because a lot of retailers, what they've done is they just put in the extra work to then hire people to do all of that work for you, right? The redundant work that you don't want to do, especially if you don't like cooking or prepping. So a lot of grocery stores now sell food frozen and fresh, already cut, already divided, already done all the prep for you. And like I said at the beginning, that is about 95% of cooking is cutting the vegetables or fruits or meats or whatever it is. It's just getting the stuff ready. Which you can just buy it ready now at relatively cheap prices. So again, if you don't enjoy cutting an orange, you can buy an orange already cut. If you don't like, or if you maybe buy an orange, you cut and you find it goes bad, then buy frozen cut oranges. So yeah, they basically have every single option now these days, especially where we are in the world. So again, some even have recipes on the back as well, right? Like if you buy, I don't know, like a frozen, I don't know, frozen Brussels sprouts, for instance. If you look on the back, they could have ideas or recipes for you. And a lot of the brands too, like if you look up like President's Choice Organics or any other brand, they'll most likely have recipes for the thing you're actually buying, right? Like, oh, a Brussels sprout recipe or butternut squash recipe or something. So they usually put it on the back or now kind of on the websites as well. So it's really cool to actually have that that for you, right? So just again, if you want a snack, like really good snacks, is in this picture here is really good snacks, right? Some fruits. They're ready basically for a smoothie. You just basically pour it into a blender, you blend it up, and you have yourself a smoothie. So it's really cool, especially the one over there with some big pieces of coconut. So again, remember, prepping and cooking food can be fun, and it's all about mindset, right? So one thing that I always say too is, before I used to hate doing dishes and just like tedious stuff, and then basically it just changes one word, right? Like, oh, I get to cook, or I get to do the dishes, instead of I have to do the dishes. Oh my God, I have to do the dishes again. But you get to do the dishes. You have dishes to do, right? So if you just kind of change your mindset and be like, wow, I actually have food to cut and have food to eat, it's really, really good, right? Because then there's a lot of people in the world that don't have food. They don't have food to cut or prepare or anything like that, right? They have a lot of time, but they don't have the resources or the food that we have here. So again, just kind of be humble and kind of change your mindset in that case. But yeah, that's all I pretty much wanted to talk about today about food prep.